You're listening to the Candler in Conversation podcast from the Candler Foundry at Emory University's Candler School of Theology. We engage our faculty, staff, students, and alumni in conversations about faith, practice, and vocation. We hope that our podcast inspires you to explore theology, grow spiritually, and learn in community. And now it's time for the episode. Hello, listeners, and welcome to our series, Ministry and Entrepreneurship, where we highlight members of the Candler community that successfully operate in both spaces. I'm your host, Cristha Edwards Lea, and today I'm sitting here with Reverend Dr. Gregory Ellison II. Dr. Ellison joined the Candler faculty in 2009 as the Associate Professor of Pastoral Care and Counseling. His teaching draws primarily from his work with the organization he founded called Fearless Dialogues, a nonprofit organization that creates unique spaces for unlikely partners to have hard, heartfelt conversations on taboo subjects like racism, classism, and community violence. Ellison's research focuses on caring with marginalized populations, pastoral care as social activism, and 20th and 21st century mysticism. He is the author of Cut Dead But Still Alive, Caring for African American Young Men, and Fearless Dialogues, A New Movement for Justice, and is the editor of Anchored in the Current, Discovering Howard Thurman as Educator, Activist, Guide, and Prophet. Dr. Ellison, thank you for joining us.
It is so good to be here. Thank you, Crista.
Thank you. I was doing a bit of reading, preparing for our conversation today, and I usually like to start with asking about what it is that you do. But after I read your bio on your website, you really enlightened me that that's sometimes not the first thing that you want to ask someone when getting to learn about them. So my question to you is, what created the Craftsman of Care sitting in front of me today?
Actually, I would rephrase that question just a little bit and say,
Okay.
who created the Craftsman of Care? And that's a very unique moniker, a Craftsman of Care. I am the grandson of Willie and Mary Jane Simpson. They are pillars of hope for me. My grandparents, my grandfather had a 4th grade education. My grandmother had an 8th grade education, and they committed very early in life that all of their children would go to college and would not pick cotton, which was a very unique vantage point for 2 young people who only knew cotton. And so they were visionaries, well beyond their time. My maternal grandmother, her name was Francina Ellison. She was a nurse, and she actually did prenatal care and helped to deliver babies. Unfortunately, given the unique skill set she had because of the color of her skin, she was not afforded the opportunity to receive the credentialing of medical practitioners. Yet, whenever there was a crisis, they brought my grandmother in. So, in those two ancestral realms, there is visionary leadership. There is the willingness to enter into spaces of crisis. And I also like to reference my beloved father, who is now also walking with the ancestors, Gregory Ellison Sr. He was an accountant, and my father could tell a story with numbers. And one of the unique ways he and my mother moved to Atlanta to participate in the civil rights movement. And my father actually contributed to the movement by keeping the books of many of the iconic civil rights leaders who we read about in history now. And so at a very young age, he began to instill in me that there are ways that you can contribute to justice movements and be an activist in very unique and creative, authentic ways that um, really highlight the gifts that God has given you. And so he expanded my frame of what activism looks like. And finally, my mother, a special education teacher for 33 years. And Crista is a crazy story. I've shared this many times with folks, but my mother's first classroom here, she taught in Atlanta public schools, was literally in a boiler room. And so her students who had different learning abilities, different psychological, physical, emotional differences were literally asked to learn in a boiler room in Atlanta. And so just imagine how hot a boiler room would be in the summer months of August, and how cold it would be, right? No insulation in a boiler room in the middle of winter. And so my mother would come home and teach us that, regardless of who you are, your ability, your background, you are deserving of dignity and respect. And so when I think of who I am and who I have become, I am mindful of the visionary leadership of my maternal grandparents. I am very aware of my paternal grandmother's, willingness to enter into places of crisis, even though they did not give her title. I am highly cognizant of my father's willingness to stretch the bounds of how we consider and conceptualize activism. And I am deeply rooted in the ministerial and kind of pastoral sentiments of my mother, that every human being is deserving of dignity and respect. And so those elements are central to how I see myself and how I embody and practice care.
You actually answered a question for me that I've had in that moment since it was my first year at Candler. It was orientation, and I felt really lost because I came from a biology background. And so for the
Mhm.
first 2 days, when people would introduce themselves and they would talk and share, they would have these what I felt like to be wonderful pastoral histories. And
Mhm.
I feel like I didn't have anything to share.
Mhm.
And so when we got to Fearless Dialogues and we went to the tables and you asked what our gifts were, and we had to use other identifiers than our previous things that we've done,
Yeah.
for the first time, I felt ease. And then I always ask myself, like, what are those things? What inspires him? Like, how did you get to this place? And I hope for everyone listening that we hear it's the who's in our life, the
Yes.
people that have influenced who we have become. And so when we're thinking about entrepreneurship, if someone is trying to pursue that and go after that, especially in the ministerial space, how important to you is self identity in that process?
Yeah, man, you're really good at this. Let's just name the fact that you've done this before. This ain't your first time. Um, so as I think about entrepreneurship and identity, um, I think there are a number of people who chase after um, acclaim and recognition and even money. Um, But when you think of the synergy of ministry and entrepreneurship, I think the goal is altered. And, for me, the work that has evolved into Fearless Dialogues began out of a communal need. It was a a conviction, if you will. Um, I had just written my first book. It was entitled Cut Dead But Still Alive. It was about young men who feel unseen and unheard, and how that feeling of deep invisibility and feeling muted not only affects one's sense of self, but how one and engages with the world and envisions possibilities for
Yeah.
their lives. It affects hope. And so I just written that book, and it was published just weeks before the Zimmerman verdict. And so, as a young African American professor at a school like Emory, um, I was being invited to participate in a number of interviews like this. But the difference is there would be multiple people on the panel, and they would say, "Hey, Greg, you got 20 seconds to share your thoughts," and I would get 5, 7 seconds in, and then someone would cut me off and start yelling.
Mm,
And I was thinking, wow, this is going out to a national audience. What is this modeling in terms of how we have hard conversations about topics like race and gun violence and the treatment of Black bodies? And it just really irritated me. And as we were approaching those moments that you will recall, Krista, when people were marching to the state capitals. This is pre Black Lives Matter,
yeah.
with their Skittles in their hands and their iced teas and their hoodies on. Um, I was on NPR just days before that, and I said, "Hey, if you choose to march to bring attention to how the denigration of Black male bodies and Black female bodies, you know, that's the right thing to do. March. But if you're in Atlanta and you want to have a hard conversation about how we can improve the well-being of the lives of our of young people in our communities, come to Emory." And I did not recognize what I was doing.
Wow.
I did not recognize that 400 people would show up. But I had a sense that this was the right thing to do in terms of utilizing the gifts that God had placed on my heart, of bringing people together, of having hard conversations, of thinking about ways to care for young people who may feel ostracized and on the margins. And I had no idea on July 22nd of 2013, that those 400 people would evolve into 60,000 nearly 10 years later. And so, to your question about the intersection of ministry and entrepreneurship and identity, God led me to a unique space where I had an opportunity to share my voice and invite others in. I sought to be responsive
Mm,
to that call. And as a result of that responsiveness, things began to evolve and expand beyond my wildest dreams. I never thought, I don't have an MBA. I didn't think that I would be the founder and executive director of an organization with 17 staff members and full-time people, and we have grants. And that was not the intention on day one.
mm,
But I am most grateful that this opportunity has exposed me to new worlds of understanding um, about myself and engagement with people I would have never imagined that I would sit across the table from. And so it is a gift.
I'm really glad that you brought up 2013. I was reading an article by Arts ATL. They had covered it when it
Hmm.
just happened, and
Yeah.
they were sharing at the time you had reached 20,000, but now we hear it's 60,000 people.
Yeah.
Achieving that kind of success, although it was unexpected, takes a certain work ethic.
Hmm.
So, if someone is listening right now, what would you say was the hardest thing for you in that process? And how should someone approach sitting down at the table for the first time, deciding, okay, I'm going to start this grassroots organization because, like you, I've had a call, I've seen the response, and I know that it's needed in this world and in this community?
So, I mean, though I don't have an MBA, I am in constant conversation with people who do have business acumen. And as a result of that kind of, um, engagement, I am, some of the things that I am not as strong in are, are expanded. And so what I mean by that is, as you're starting out, it's important to do a market analysis
Yeah.
to see um, what is currently being done in the sector or sphere that you're seeking to influence, and how will you contribute to that work in a unique way.
Mm.
Um, you know, Consultants who invite people into hard conversations, I don't want to say they're a dime a dozen, um, but there are people who do it, and there are people who do it well.
And you are one of the people that do it well.
And so I think one of the things that we have had to think about is what differentiates us from other people in the market. I am of the mindset that there I don't operate in a scarcity mindset, so I don't see myself as competing with others. And I think that's part of my theological grounding. I believe that, God has bountiful blessings that can be spread around to people, but I do have to have a niche.
Right.
And the work that we do has to really meet that niche. And so at Fearless Dialogues, we create these unique spaces for unlikely partners, people who don't normally talk, to have heartfelt conversations. And we do that by utilizing music and art, which is something that's different than some of our peers. We also have built these theory-based modules, and we call them experiments. And so, one of the things that we recognized is that there are a lot of folks who do this work, and it's conversation based. It may be interactive, but it may not have theory.
Mm.
Whereas, and then there are other folks who may lecture the whole time, and it's not engaging. And so we have gone to great lengths of figuring out how do we merge the two. Um, and that's what really differentiates us in the market. I think the um, one of the other points that is really um, keen for young entrepreneurs to think about is it's really vital to have, if not a formal, an informal board of directors, um, individuals who can hold you accountable,
Mm.
um, and who can help you discern what is working, what is not working, how do you pivot. Um, and I think that one of the final areas is recognizing that you may not make money um, immediately.
Yeah.
So my wife and I put forward the first $16,000
Wow.
of Fearless Dialogues, and I our organization, and this is partly because of a lack of business acumen, but partly because it's hard work. We Our organization didn't get into the black until year 3.
Mm.
I didn't get my first meaningful paycheck until year 8,
Wow.
right? And so, and my father was a business owner, so one of my priorities is, in order to have good work, you have to hire good people. And in order to keep good people, you got to pay good people.
Exactly.
And so for the first 8 years, I paid the staff well before I paid myself. And so um, it requires sacrifice. And I think many businesses don't grow or survive because there has to be serious skin in the game of the people who are leading the organizations. Um, and sometimes that skin in the game is financial. Sometimes it comes in other shapes, forms, and fashions. But you got to put the skin in the game. It requires extreme amounts of hard work and time and sleepless nights. I wake up thinking about the work that I do, and I go to bed thinking about the work that I do. And for me, and I know we're going long, Crista, and you're gonna
Oh, no,
edit
no, this
this.
is perfect.
But for me, I think it's also um, it cannot be discounted that I'm bivocational, and so I have responsibilities at Candler
Yeah.
um, to be present to students, to be fully present when I teach, and that's one thing that I have been adamant about, that, I want my classroom experience um, to to be one of the highlights of my week. And so that requires a constant amount of preparation and thought and deep care for students. And so I don't want students at any point to feel shortchanged. I also have to write.
Yeah.
And if this work is theory based, I have to research. And so um, the beauty of being bivocational is that there is symmetry and synergy in the work that I do. And so being a pastoral care professor and thinking about ways that communities can engage with each other in conversation, I'm able to do research that fuels the practices that are implemented in fearless dialogues, but also the wisdom that I gain from fearless dialogues informs how I teach and write. And so it is a cyclical process. So I invite those of you who are bivocational to be creative in thinking about how might one sphere of my life influence the other sphere.
I was thinking about, just as you were talking,
Mm-hmm.
I work at Candler, but I also work at a church,
Yeah.
and I also have my own business.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes when I'm in conversation with people about that, they don't understand how the three fit.
Mm-hmm.
But you answered it during your talk when you said that there is synergy in the work.
Yeah.
And so when I look at all three, they do have a connecting point.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were talking, I was also hearing one of your students,
Hmm.
Julian Reed, who also was a part of this podcast. And he said you were one of the first people that he saw that was a successful spiritual entrepreneur.
Mm.
Before, you hadn't really seen that before. And it was your mentorship that truly helped him with launching and creating Notes of Rest, something that now also is successful.
Yeah.
So, if students are listening right now, or just anyone that's seeking a mentor, how did your relationship start and how did it grow? If someone is seeking a mentor, what would you suggest that they do?
Yeah. I mean, Julian is a special human being. I love Julian Reed. Um, and, he and I developed a friendship and a mentorship before he um, launched Notes of Rest. But Julian is bivocational too. Julian is a professional musician. And so during his time at Candler, he his debut album with the Juju Exchange, his band, charted on Billboard, right? And so, he's a uniquely gifted human being
Yes, he is.
to start. But we all have unique gifts. And as I think about the various strands of work that you're engaged in, Crista, um, you know, I I would invite um, those who may be listening to this to not see those varied strands as compartments of oneself, but to see yourself as a whole being utilizing the fullness of your gifts in different spaces,
That's good.
right? So I am not a different Greg when I'm in the classroom than who I am when I am in a pulpit, than who I am when I'm talking to young people in the community center or corporate executives in a leadership conference. I'm the same Greg. And I think that kind of integrity and authenticity and wholeness keeps one from being torn asunder. um, and so, too, does mentorship help in grounding one in a sense of living an undivided life. Um, I am immensely grateful for, um, I think it's first important because I mentioned the board of directors. When we're thinking about this in terms of mentorship, I'm sorry, in terms of entrepreneurship, Krista, I think it's important to recognize that there are differences between advisors, directors, and mentors. It is rare that one person can be all three. I think advisors do just that. They're strategic in offering good advice.
Yeah.
um, and oftentimes that advice is targeted at a certain part of one's life. Mentors, no, directors, right? Directors really have a key role in helping you think about the policy, the practice, the development of one's business, right? Or organization. That's different from practical advice.
Yeah.
But mentors, on the other hand, are concerned about the whole self of the human, right? Um, they're concerned about your family life and how your family life is impacted by a bivocational reality. They're concerned about how the 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 emotional and mental strain of living a bivocational life impacts your spiritual well-being. And you know, I'm grateful to have mentors like Luther Smith, who is an emeritus professor here at Candler. Um, and one thing that patterns our relationship is that, and this was really shocking to me. I just had to be honest. It's really, really shocking to me. Luther and other mentors of mine, I call them my Yodas, they see me as a younger peer. And by that, I mean, mentorship is different than advisement and directorship because it is mutually beneficial. At times, I sit in the seat as student in relationship to my Yodas. In other times, as a younger peer, they see me as teacher,
Mm.
which is, it trips me out because, at one point, the oldest of my Yodas, her name is Mari Evans, God rest her soul. At one point, Miss Mari was 93. And she said, Greg, you are a younger peer. And so, what does it mean as you are considering the life and well being of this idea, this seed that is growing in you, and you can show up to an advisor and ask specific questions? You could be in relationship with a director who can help you think about the policy and the balance sheet, and how do you get out of the red and into the black, and also how do you have this mentor who says, Greg, you need to go take a break, or Crista, I think it's time for you to go on vacation.
Yeah.
You need to rest your brain and your body, um, because this work is long term work. And I'm gifted to be in relationship, and to see Julian as a younger peer, and to continue that that lineage of teaching and learning in company with wise souls, as some of my older peers have done with me.
What I'm hearing in your response is that you must have discernment about which category the person fits in. Because sometimes I've heard friends of mine at Candler, just, in general, and they're struggling with their mentor mentee relationship. And maybe it's because they're a director, they're not actually your mentor.
That's right.
They're not meant to serve in that area of your life. And
Yeah.
that just blessed me because I'm like, wow, maybe this person really should be over there and fit in a different category.
Mhm.
I feel so full. You shared so much with us. And so for our
Mm.
listeners, we know that Candler in Conversation aims to be practical.
Yes, Lord.
And that's what this whole conversation was. But I have to ask the question,
Mhm.
what would be your 3 tips to someone who is listening right now, and either they're starting out with their entrepreneurial pursuits, or they're listening to this podcast and now they realize they got to do some things better? What would be your 3 tips?
So the first of the three goes back to the way we started, Crista. Um, and it would be to be and not simply do. My grandfather would often say, what you do tells me very little about who you be,
Mm.
but who you be will inform everything that you do. So my first step, or first piece of advice for those who are moving in the space as spiritual innovators and entrepreneurs, is to be very clear about who you be. My second piece of advice would be to recognize that the work that you do and who you be in doing that work has the potential to impact generations that are not yet born. My son has a T-shirt that says, "I am my ancestors' wildest dream." So what does it mean to fulfill the legacy of those who sacrificed on your behalf and to create a better world for those who have not yet breathed a breath? Yes. Number 3, find a way to celebrate small accomplishments. Um, I shared earlier, Crista, that it took us 3 years to get into Black. And I'm married.
Yeah.
So my wife is like, "Are you sure about this?" And it took us 8 years to start getting some of the money back.
Yeah.
And so in that 8-year journey, I had to find ways to celebrate accomplishments, however small they may be, that in the minds and eyes of some are just completely insignificant. But only you, the visionary, will know how hard it was to write that paragraph for that grant, or to finally get that meeting with that person, or to finally see something that's not a negative on the balance sheet. I mean, only you know how much struggle and prayer and heartache it took. And the world won't know this is a moment to pat you on the back.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it is so vital in a world that, particularly if people see what you do as, "Oh, he's a natural. She's good at this." I mean, she could just get up in the morning and just start talking on the microphone, and it's just like cake. No, you had to work before you got to this moment, and
Yeah.
the world won't see that. And so when you hit that space, when God has given you this clearing in the midst of the forest, dance in the middle of it.
Mm. Wow. I I am so deeply moved. I think that's the only way I can describe your 3 tips and everything that you shared. I feel like I've been journeying through your life at points, just listening to the things that you've had to share. And for everyone listening, I hope you hear the struggle, but also the praise and the
Mm,
joy that has been fearless dialogues. I I'm grateful for your obedience in this moment because you had to know that there was a call and a conviction to move forward. And to your point of taking 8 years to get a check that really started to give you back what you poured in, like that takes obedience, that takes discipline, that takes drive and determination, and a partner who also believes in
yeah,
what it is that
for
you're trying to
sure.
do. I just got married. I don't know.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
man.
I don't I'm like, wow. I'm like, I got some things to learn from this. And so just
Yeah.
thank you. Just thank you for your wealth of knowledge and your willingness to share and your willingness to be the who to somebody else in the same way that you were for others.
Yeah.
So your ministry has blessed me. You're the reason I stayed at Candler after orientation.
Really?
Genuinely.
Oh my.
Genuinely.
To
I
God be
was
the
I was I was like, okay, God, I know you told me to come here,
glory.
but I don't look like nobody's preacher, and I don't have. I became a Christian a couple years ago, and I just had all of
Mm,
these things, and so your work is grounding
mm,
for those of us who don't necessarily fit in a mold.
mm.
You create language and you give life. Um, in a way that I'm grateful for, and I'm sure for the other 60,000 people who have been a part are grateful for too.
Lord have mercy. Thank
Yeah.
you so, so much. I received that as a
Yeah.
gift. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And so, for those of you who are listening, if you'd like to learn more about Dr. Ellison's work, go ahead and visit us at candlerfoundry.emory.edu and make sure that you watch more episodes. They will all be as wonderful and as full as this one has been. So, just thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by Emory's Candler School of Theology. To learn more about our institution, please visit us at candler.emory.edu.